When Ayn entered the handheld gaming space with the Odin in 2022, they pulled off releasing not only a fairly powerful Android, but they did it at a reasonable price, and they coupled it with great hardware and a fantastic gaming experience. While Ayn has had their fair share of shipping issues when it came to meeting such high demand of the Odin, overall, the device was a success once they actually did catch up with that demand. But after Odin's success, we saw the subsequent mess of Ayn's next endeavor, the handheld gaming PC, Loki, review still coming soon. So when they announced the Odin 2, the general reception was basically, this sounds amazing, but I'll believe it when I see it. And I think that's a fair take. Ayn's promised quite a lot again with the Odin 2, mainly the aggressive shipping times, promising backers that they will receive their Odin 2s by the end of 2023. Well, as an Indiegogo backer in the 3,500 range, they've certainly delivered on their estimated delivery timeline. I got mine on November 16th, way ahead of schedule. We're going to take an in-depth look at Odin 2's hardware, software, and gaming performance to see if this is really the most powerful gaming Android we've ever seen. So get subscribed and let's get started. This video is sponsored by tomtoc. Tomtoc's brand new Steam Deck armor case is tailor-made to fit the Steam Deck. It's not the standard case you might expect, because it's better. It's made from German Bayer polycarbonate material and has passed the military standard drop test. The armor case has a silicone strip on the inside to make sure that your Steam Deck is nice and safe when it's locked inside of the case. The best feature about this case for me is that it has a charging pass-through so that you can charge your Steam Deck while it's still inside the case. So get yourself armor that George Clooney's Batman would be proud of, with these big old thingies here so your analog sticks are nice and secure in the case. So what are you waiting for? tomtoc's Black Friday deals are still live for a little bit longer. Head to the link in the description and pick up the Steam Deck armor case before the sale ends. And thanks to tomtoc for sponsoring this video. The unboxing is pretty solid. I like that it's not wrapped in tons of plastic. Just a tab to pull the box out of the case. Right at the top, we've got a nice quick start guide. It's got an overview of the device and its controls on the left, with a detailed look at its specs on the right. Putting the Odin aside for a sec, underneath the Odin is a USB-C to USB-C cable. It is a nice touch that Ayn branded it this time around. It definitely adds to the premium feel of the product. Removing the Odin from the plastic wrap, I've got the transparent purple Max version here. The immediate comparison to make is against the original Odin. The Odin 2 is definitely thicker, but that's in part of the larger grips on the back. Even though I didn't review the Loki yet, you can't not look at the evolution of Ayn's hardware design without it. The Odin 2 looks more like the Loki than it does the first generation Odin actually. Starting with the analog sticks, they're the first upgrade from Odin that is immediately noticeable. The first generation Odin's analog sticks were a bit too sunken in, so you wouldn't get a great range of motion. That issue is completely resolved here. They've completely overhauled the analog sticks here. To my surprise, the Odin 2 actually has the same analog sticks as the Retroid Pocket 2S. I just reviewed the Retroid Pocket 2S, and even then I said that they're the best feeling analog sticks I've ever experienced. So I'm really excited to see them pop up here too. I wasn't expecting that. On a device this size though, I do wish the analog sticks were a bit larger. The Odin 2 is already not pocketable, so might as well give it super large analog sticks, just like the Loki. I get that some people might prefer rubber membrane, but I'm actually a fan of the clicky Vita-style D-pad, and I think it really works very well here with the Odin 2. We've got our start and select buttons at the top, and our home and back buttons on the bottom. The ABXY buttons feel really great. They press down fast and are nice and quiet. On some devices, if you press hard enough, the buttons could sink into the device. That's not an issue here at all. My only nitpick is that I'm just not a huge fan of this gamer font, and I wish the button layout matched an Xbox controller. I'm really happy to see that Odin 2 moved away from the Super Famicom color scheme for their buttons. It makes the device look way cleaner, especially with the transparent purple. At the top of the device, we've got great feeling L1 and R1 buttons. They are pretty clicky and easy to press anywhere, even from the sides. We've also got amazing feeling analog triggers. They've got a huge range of motion, so I'm actually expecting a lot of really precise and comfortable gaming with these. The top is also where we've got our power button that doubles as a fingerprint reader, a charging indicator, the volume rocker, exhaust vent, HDMI out, and a microSD card slot. On the bottom of the Odin 2 is where we've got our headphone jack and our USB-C port. The back of the device is really sleek. It's got a nice large vent to help keep the device cool, and text that says Ayn on the back, as well as 2 programmable back buttons. From the back we can also see how pronounced the grips are on the Odin 2. It really makes this device a huge upgrade ergonomically compared to the first generation Odin. Style-wise, we have RGB lights on the analog sticks and on the side of the controller. The first generation Odin had lights, but they were not RGB, just a static color. They can get pretty bright, but it's also great to see that there is settings in the software to dim them. Spec-wise, the Odin 2 comes in 3 variations. There's the base, Pro, and Max models. The biggest difference between these 3 models are the RAM and internal storage. But they all have a Qualcomm Snapdragon 8 Gen 2 processor, an 8000 mAh battery, a 6-inch 1080p 60Hz IPS touchscreen, 65-watt fast charging, Wi-Fi 7, Bluetooth 5.3, and runs Android 13. The base model has 8GB of RAM and 128GB of internal storage with an introductory price of $299 and will retail for $339. The Pro model has 12GB of RAM and 256GB of internal storage with an introductory price of $369 and will retail for $439. And the Max model, which is the one that I've got here, has 16GB of RAM, 512GB of internal storage with an introductory price of $459 and will retail for $499. Before we even take a look at gameplay performance, I think the Max pricing is a bit high considering we're getting into the Steam Deck level pricing, where the Pro model I think has a good amount of RAM and is available for under $400 right now. You can also get quite a large selection of color choices for the Odin 2. It's available in transparent blue, transparent purple, black, cold gray, or white. I think the transparent purple is definitely fun, but I'm a little bit envious of the white color too, especially after seeing it on my Loki. It's just very sleek looking. The first time we turn the Odin on, we've got a setup wizard for language selection, network connection, time zone, and choosing a default launcher. You can choose between the Odin launcher or the default Android one. We'll go with the Odin launcher so we can take a look at its functionality and see if there's improvements since the first Odin. We also have a choice of which navigational bar style we want to go with, gesture or 3-button. I definitely personally prefer the gesture one. Odin's launcher is more of a home screen replacement than a games launcher. It's pretty much the same software we saw with the first generation Odin. I like that you do have your device-specific options here though. That includes quick access to performance modes and the RGB lighting, as well as access to more in-depth Odin-specific settings. In the Odin settings is where you'll find one of the most important settings before you dive into getting all of your emulators set up. By default, the Odin 2 buttons map to retro controls, which is the Nintendo Switch controller layout. It's much easier to set this to Xbox layout instead for games, especially if you're planning to play Android games. With the Odin 2, we've got a new feature here, a fingerprint sensor. This is the first gaming Android that I've seen that introduces a fingerprint reader, which is pretty cool. It's definitely nice to have this considering you're possibly storing some personal information on the Odin. Setup is super easy and just requires that you rest your finger on the power button repeatedly. I've never done this setup process on an Android phone before, but it felt nearly identical to the experience on an iPhone. Once my fingerprint was set up, the sensor worked actually with no hassles. I was really pleasantly surprised to find that I don't even need to press the power button. You can just rest your finger on the power button with the screen off and it will auto unlock. And the unlock speed is insanely fast. The remaining device setup is just getting emulators installed, controls mapped, adding game folders into each app, and tweaking any settings like upscaling emulation resolution. Because I have the Odin 2 Max here, I actually feel like I've got more than enough storage where I don't even need to install a microSD card right now. I just plugged the device right into my computer and started copying ROMs over to the device's internal storage. One downside transferring this way is that the file transfer speeds seemed insanely slow. But hey, I don't need to buy an extra SD card, so I'll do the rest off camera to save us some time. When it comes to gaming, we've got the best of the best specs here. Classic systems are no sweat for the Odin 2. When we get to PS1 and N64, we can start upscaling and applying some tweaks and patches for even more enhancements. For PlayStation 1, I've upscaled to 16x, which is 8176 by 3584 resolution, and applied widescreen hacks. I'm definitely playing a version of Metal Gear Solid that's even better than the one that we've got in Konami's official collection. For N64, here's some Ocarina of Time upscaled and with some HD texture packs, and I think it looks fantastic. Even harder to run N64 games are no issue here. While Mario Tennis and Pokemon Snap do require a little bit of tweaking, once you get those settings right, it runs 100% full speed. Getting into PS2, even though Aether SX2's development stalled, using Nether SX2 patches, we can get the best version of the PS2 emulation app possible at this point. Burnout is usually a harder game to emulate, but it played with no problems, even upscaled. Tony Hawk Pro Skater is another one that usually struggles for me, but I had no issues when upscaling, even with widescreen. PlayStation Portable looks fantastic on Odin 2, performs great, and is really an overall excellent experience, especially when we upscale. We can push the PSP upscaling pretty high too. Even though it's more than the resolution of the Odin, we can go up to 10x with no lag or frame dips, even in God of War Chains of Olympus. Getting into GameCube, we're going to see just how far we can push the Odin 2 by jumping into difficult to emulate games. With changing no settings at all except for upscaling and widescreen hacks, F-Zero GX runs full speed, and man, it is so much fun to play. I'm using the latest nightly build of Dolphin and no tweaks, just 1080p upscaling. Can we push emulation even farther? Star Wars Rogue Squadron 2 is also running pretty well. It's not perfect though, there are some stutters, but this is the best I've ever seen the game run on Android, and once those stutters calm down, I really do think the game is 100% playable. Even 3DS emulation upscaled is really great looking and performing. I did have to change the audio options though, otherwise I would get some weird stuttering. Nintendo Switch emulation is a really exciting thing to see running so well on Android. Breath of the Wild actually runs, that alone is impressive. Yuzu is very much still under heavy development, so I would imagine that a lot of the slowdown or issues we see now can be optimized over time. Tunic is an example of a game that runs at full speed, but does have some graphical glitches. But we still can get a lot of AAA games up and running pretty well. Super Mario Wonder actually seems to run at full speed. While there are some graphical glitches here and there, I think that's more of an emulator enhancement that we'll see over time. I mean, I can even run Super Mario RPG on the Odin 2. There's missing audio for some reason and it eventually crashes, but the fact that a brand new game runs is pretty awesome. My main issue with Yuzu actually is just that I like to set my Odin controller to Xbox mode, so that messes up Yuzu's controller mapping. The app doesn't support controller remapping yet, so it's a little hard to get used to that control scheme. But besides that, this is by far the best Android emulation I've ever experienced. PlayStation Vita emulation is still in early development on Android, so you're going to find more misses than hits when it comes to Vita emulation performance, but I expect that to change over time as the emulator evolves. I did find that any game I tried that is listed as playable did work on the Odin 2, so that's a great sign. I would also guess that over time with updates to the Vita 3K emulator, we'll see performance improvements that will benefit Odin 2. So that might wrap up emulation, but we're not done. We've got the world of Android gaming to take advantage of on the Odin 2. A game like Genshin Impact is really demanding, and we can tweak the settings to take full advantage of Odin 2. I've got the game set to high settings and I'm able to get a full 60 FPS. There are occasional small dips, but I think it's very stable overall. Genshin for some reason is a game that actually doesn't have controller support, so we need to take advantage of Odin's controller mapping software. It's actually one of the most intuitive, easy to set up screen mapping experiences. I found it to be pretty much the same as the first generation Odin, but it's worth restating how great of an experience this is. In January, when we saw the release of Razer's Edge, their screen mapping just simply isn't as intuitive. Another fairly demanding game on Android is Call of Duty Mobile. It runs great at high graphics settings. Also, it seems like the Odin 2's controller actually is recognized as a real Xbox controller, so we have full controller support on Call of Duty Mobile without any screen mapping at all. Even for Minecraft, we can crank the settings pretty high and we get great performance. Spec-wise, we're going to have no problems when it comes to game streaming, but it's more just about how it feels in general. With the Odin 2 having Wi-Fi 7, we've got the best of the best when it comes to speed and latency, as long as your router supports it. Xbox Game Pass in the cloud works like a charm. I almost felt like I wasn't even playing remotely. Steam Link also works pretty well. I just totally forgot how to play Neon White. Let's really quickly do some Odin 1 vs Odin 2 comparisons. I wanted to really quickly just demonstrate the performance jump we're getting from the first generation Odin to the second one. While the Odin 2 emulation sees a huge performance jump, especially in higher end systems like GameCube, I have to say that Odin 1 performance has come a really long way through emulation optimizations. F-Zero GX on Odin 1 is pretty close to full speed at native resolution when you're on a track, but there are just too many frame dips and audio stutters when you boost or crash into a wall. Besides emulation, we can see that Minecraft has lots of stutters and lags on Odin 1, but Odin 2 it's perfect. It's not to say that the Odin 1 is bad. For what it still does it great. But the performance gain on Odin 2 is truly significant. The last thing to touch on before we wrap up is Ayn as a company. Looking at Odin 2's crowdfunding campaign and the experience of backing and receiving Odin 2 alone, it's been very positive. They estimated a December shipping date and far exceeded that timeline. I'm sure their shipping isn't complete considering they have over 5,000 backers, but this is a great sign. Stepping a little farther back, I can't not briefly mention that my experience receiving my 3 Loki devices was kind of a disaster. My backer number was skipped, I ended up opting for a different color just to get the device shipped at all, and somehow still had to pay them a remainder of a balance for my devices even though I paid in full. I just wanted the devices to eventually review, so I didn't go through trying to figure out what balance I was even covering. Beyond that, they also kept changing the SKUs and variations of Loki, even canceling some of them that apparently didn't meet high enough demand. All of these changes and updates, but no communication from Ayn at all. I ended up having to track down Ayn team members and message them on Discord just to get my back devices. These are all signs of a business that is just logistically not set up to being able to handle getting products to customers. But actually, back to Odin 2. I'm seeing the exact opposite experience this time around, and I'm optimistic that Ayn has grown from the Loki fiasco. It doesn't change my bad Loki experience, but I'd like to think that I got my Odin 2 ahead of schedule because they are a growing and evolving business. So that brings us to wrapping up. Seeing Ayn grow as a company, being a backer of their products, I do feel a sense of pride. They are making great products, and I'm proud to be a supporter of their work. Their logistics have left much to be desired in the past, but that's clearly improving too. The Odin 2 device itself is a beast of a handheld. It's got seriously impressive specs, aggressive pricing, and hardware that makes it top tier for performance, as well as great ergonomics. They've taken the best of Odin and Loki to create this next generation handheld. The performance gains alone is what everybody has been clamoring for. While I won't be testing literally every single game in the GameCube and PS2 library, the fact that it can emulate each of those systems' hardest to run games with upscale says a lot. Odin 2 delivers on all of that, and will certainly be my benchmark for handhelds I look at moving forward. As far as which of their 3 variations to get, I actually think if I could go back and pick my model again, I would have just saved a little bit of money and gone with the Pro, at least as an early backer. Right now the price difference between the Pro and the Max is $90. When Odin 2 jumps to full retail price, the difference is actually only $60. Sure, you get more storage, but the difference between 12GB and 16GB I think is negligible. And because of the micro SD card slot availability, the internal storage is not that big of a deal. Are there some downsides to Odin? Sure. As usual, setting up an Android device for gaming and emulation isn't necessarily fun for somebody who wants to just jump right into gaming. Luckily, since the Odin 2 is so powerful, you don't really need to tweak any settings. You can just install an emulator, map the controller, and get gaming. But you do still need to know which emulators to download, where to get them from, and stuff like that. I also don't love their included Odin launcher since it's more app-focused than gaming-focused. What it comes down to is that Ayn is rivaling massive companies like Razer. The Odin 2, I think, outdoes the Razer Edge in nearly every single way. A great key mapper for games without controller support, a good level of customization, a top-tier chipset, incredible analog sticks and analog triggers, and a massive battery to get the most out of an on-the-go gaming experience are just some of the features that make Odin 2 stand out above the rest. I think Odin 2 offers something special, and it's won me over for sure. But let me know down in the comments. Have you gotten your Odin 2 yet? What do you think of it? Are you still waiting for yours to ship? Are you passing on the Odin? What device do you have instead? Make sure you're subscribed so you don't miss future videos, and thanks for watching.